Anesthesiologists of Reddit, what was something you won't forget hearing from someone that was under? My husband was put under to get his wisdom teeth out. He was a little anxious and also is just kind of anal. He's an engineer, so he read his pre-op instructions front to back like a dozen times. One of the things it said was you may experience profound disorientation upon awakening. As he woke up, he opened one eye and looked around the room. Then said extremely huffily, I wouldn't call this profound. Then he started crying. I was coming out of the fog of anesthesia from a colonoscopy. Apparently I didn't recognize my wife and refused her affections, telling her she was pretty. I was married. Got big brownie points for that. My dad asked my mom to pick up his butt cheeks so he could fart and it was too heavy. My husband had his ACL and meniscus repaired. When they brought him back into the room, he stared at me through half-closed eyes until the nurses left and then said, I love you. I'm glad you're here. I melted. Then he conked back out for about half an hour and woke up with a big gasp. I thought he was in pain. That's how loud it was. And went, Burger King burger. I said, you want a Burger King burger? He said I do, so I had to get him a Burger King burger for dinner. He didn't remember anything until he was back home several hours later with Burger King sitting in front of him. Lol. I had a surgery to remove bone spurs from my big toes in early February of 2005. I woke up while the doctor was grinding the bone down and asked if he thought Donovan McNabb could lead the Eagles to a Super Bowl win. He nodded at the anesthesiologist and I don't remember anything after that. Nurse here, was 22F. Had a teen boy come out of anesthesia who looked at me and said, hey you're the girl from last night. I had to reassure everyone that that wasn't me. One of my patients coming out of sedation embarrassed her husband who was in the room by saying that during their sex he likes to have Vicks rubbed on his backside. My wife was all doped up during her C-section and asked the anesthesiologist, did they cut me open yet? He calmly told her they did. To which she replied, oh, with a huge grin on her face. The DR and I lost it. I woke up singing the Magic School Bus theme song while someone 3 beds away was screaming in agony. I was giving a young female patient sedation for a routine colonoscopy, and as I pushed the propofol, sleepy medicine, it started to hit her. She sat straight up and yelled to everyone in the procedure room, I shaved my arsehole for you, and she flopped down on her pillow and she was asleep. One guy said, before falling asleep, whoa. That feels like a dime bag. Was under anesthesia for a breast reduction. As I was coming out, my nurse was talking to me and apparently I started saying OMG it's an angel and she looks like Barbie. I kept yelling for Barbie angel and possibly kept trying to hug her and pet her hair. I cried for her on the way home. She called to check on me later that night and referred to herself as Nurse Barbie Angel. She was the sweetest. I got put under for my wisdom teeth at 17. When I came to, the nurse or whatever was like, okay, you're probably a little groggy, just sit tight for a while. And I was like, that, I feel amazing, and proceeded to swing my legs off the table, which sent my top half spinning right after it and falling flat on my face. People laughed. I remember the laughter. A girl woke up and asked if she had been hit by a train, and then when asked if she knew why she was there, she looked down and patted her chest and said implants. She was having her ACL repaired and her mom was there. It was me. I was 19. I've never lived it down. As I put someone out for a colonoscopy one time, the patient said, you're cute. Are you gonna see my butt? Then she was out. I'm an anesthetist. Woke up a 70-year-old PT who got a penile prosthesis implant for erectile dysfunction. First thing out of his mouth in his post-surgery stupor was to request a private room and find out when he could take this baby out for a test drive. He was a happily married jokester. Apparently when I was going under, I told the anesthesiologist, don't mess this up. I know where you work. I'm sure the anesthesiologist that did my son's dental surgery will never forget him. Specifically, because he came out after the fact clearly trying very hard not to laugh to tell my wife about it. Kiddo was just chatting away while he was getting ready. Now my son is autistic and at the time had a very distinct way of speaking and pattern of emphasis along with a lisp. I literally cannot translate how he sounded talking into text. Anyway, just as they're getting ready to put him under he goes, "You're gonna need some hardcore nighttime medicine cause I have ADHD," and out, practically snoring even. They get to work, finish up and pull the mask off him. The literal second the mask was off his nose he bolts upright and finishes his sentence from however long earlier. That stuff don't work good on me. I was brought home after by my wife but was still loopy. She told the construction workers outside to make sure I didn't leave the house. They let me help pour concrete and fixed what I f***ed up. Nice guys. My daughter made them free limeade so they were always cool with us. Patient here. I was a teen apparently before I went under. I kept mumbling, "It's buried, don't worry. Stop worrying, it's buried, it's gone." My mom was there and said the staff were eyeballing her uncomfortably, and years later to this day every year she still asks me if remember anything. That if ever I need to talk she'll support me no matter what. I honestly do not know what I meant. I was 17 at the time but got my wisdom teeth taken out. Everything went as planned, but I woke up and remember seeing the oral surgeon. Me, being dosed with grade A giggle juice and having no idea WTF I was doing, asked her if she would like to grab boba sometime. I never been so embarrassed in my life. 5 years later, she let me shadow for part of my dental school shadowing requirement and is giving me a law for applications next cycle. Not a boba date but all things considered, she was a great mentor. I was recently under for abdominal surgery. My partner of 17 years who I dearly loved was the first face I remember seeing when coming out of anesthesia. I looked at him and said, "Who the FK are you and why are you staring at me?" He's still laughing. I gave a patient an IV dose of ketamine for a pain procedure. He proceeded to tell the room that everyone had turned into cartoon characters and then he announced he was melting into a wall of butter. Still my finest achievement as a physician. I'm patient's relative rather than anesthesiologist, but as he started going under, patient, hydraulics engineer, started trying to tell the DR what type of pump they should install to fix the busted blood vessel in his brain. I was told after surgery I said I love dogs and I want to eat the Taliban. My husband had knee surgery. After he woke up he half yelled half whispered apple juice. So the nurse gave him apple juice, several small cups full. He grew like a toddler and said apple juice and immediately flopped back and went back to sleep for all of 10 minutes until he woke back up gasping that he couldn't breathe. His mom, who I had met maybe 1 or 2 times at this point, went up to the foot of his bed to grab a nurse in the doorway and he bolted upright. The man projectile vomited pure apple juice directly into her face, body, the wall, the door, hallway. I have never seen anything like it in my entire life. His mom stood there soaked in juice vomit and he just rubbed his eyes and said, "I feel better, bam." Back to sleep for another 2 hours, lol. My mom woke up from dental surgery and when we were leaving the surgeon's office, he gave her goodie bag with floss and a toothbrush and stuff, and the whole way home she kept asking if she could eat the candy that the dentist gave her. Every time I told her there was no candy, she looked so heartbroken, like a little kid when their goldfish dies or something. Though we stopped at CVS on the way home and she wandered off. I found her in the candy aisle holding a giant bag of fun-sized candy, and when I told her to put it back on the shelf she dropped it on the floor and galloped away laughing at me. My son, then 10 or so, was coming to after being under when getting his broken wrist set and casted. They had to do traction to get everything aligned or something. There were quite a few people in the room. His drugged self directed all his attention to me. He was describing Big Daddy from Bioshock and kept repeating, "Dad, you know what I'm talking about," because I couldn't think of the name of the game at the time. Then he gets frustrated and yells at me, "You son of a bitch." Lots of laughs from the hospital staff. Surgeon told me that I kept them all laughing through my facial surgery. They had to keep giving me more anesthetic to shut me up, which is probably why I was sick as a dog afterwards. I pressed him hard for details but he refused to tell me what I'd said. Not the anesthesiologist, but as a surgery tech working next to them. Patient, woozily, "Doc, Will I still be able to integrate after this gas passer? Integrate? Like what patient? Like the sum of f, x, from a to b when, gas passer, pushes more milk of amnesia. My husband woke up from anesthesia after a colonoscopy just after the doctor walked in. He didn't see the doctor and told me no blowjob for you, then fell back asleep and ripped a big fart. The doctor looked at me and busted out laughing. He said not to be embarrassed. People say the weirdest things, but this one he'd remember. Kind of on topic, when my mom woke up after having a stroke, doctor asked if she recognized the people in the room. She got my sister's name right, called me my brother's name, and smiled real big at my stepdad and called him asshole. Had my wisdom teeth out. When I woke up I was so excited to get my now extracted teeth and keep them as a souvenir. The nurse said I couldn't. She wheeled me out to the front door where my wife was waiting to load me into the car. She saw my disappointed face and asked, "What's wrong, honey?" I turned and pointed to the nurse and said through my gauze stuffed mouth, "This bitch won't let me keep my teeth." My stunned wife apologized and the nurse explained that it's fine but they were a biohazard, to which I replied incredulously, "They were in my mouth an hour ago." I had a rough labor and delivery with my first baby and they had given me several shots of pain meds. I had 3 days of labor, back labor, Charlie horses in the calves of my legs, and ultimately a forceps delivery. Yeah, this was back in 1977. I was so drugged up and exhausted by the delivery. The doctor was finally stitching me up and someone in the room commented that maybe I wouldn't have such a hard time the next baby. I vaguely remember lifting my head partway off the table and told the DR to stitch me all the way up and we wouldn't have to worry about the next time. The room erupted in laughter and as I threw my head back down I was so pissed they were laughing because I was serious. P.S. I had 2 more babies a few years later. I was under general anesthesia to get my gallbladder removed. As I was being wheeled back through the double doors there was a giant TV screen that listed the surgeries going on. I was way too loopy to actually read it, but I swear I saw elbowectomy and started hysterically laughing over the idea of removing an elbow and being left with a floppy arm. Apparently what I actually said was elbow and then passed out. Anesthesiologist here. For better or for worse, I'm a big Green Bay Packers fan, so I wear a scrub cap with the Packers name colors on it. I was doing a pre-op evaluation on a kid who was a big New Orleans Saints fan. And when I walked into the room, his first words to me were "Packers suck." I laughed and continued to get him, prepare him and his family for his redo open heart surgery procedure. Fast forward to surgery a couple days later, and his mom had come back to the OR as he was going to sleep. Given the fact this was a 3 or 4 time redo sternotomy, going into the chest again, he had a higher risk of major complications from the surgery. I started to push some meds to have him go to sleep while his mom was holding his hand. As he drifted off, he said, "Wait, I have to tell my mom something." She got emotional saying how much she loved him, and we were all waiting to hear what he had to say so urgently. I paused giving him the medication, but he was already well on his way to being under. As he drifted off to sleep, he said, "Packers suck. Kid did great. Hope he is doing well." My dad is super resistant to anesthesia and most pain meds, which sucks for him. He warned them when he went to get his hip replaced, but evidently they ignored or underestimated his statement. Mid-hip replacement, he woke up, sat up in his seat, and attempted to strangle the doctor to death. He got far closer than a man in his condition should have. When I say mid-hip replacement, the hip was fully replaced. They were about to begin like closing the hole, or whatever the terminology is. When coming to after surgery, I told my mom that she was naughty and needed a spanking. I have had to get colonoscopies every couple years since I was 24, so I've gone under quite a bit for someone my age. Every time, when I wake up, I'm crying. The nurse is comforting me. They say I don't tell them why I'm upset. I'm weeping every damn time. It has gotten to the point where I warn the nurses I'll be sobbing, but not take it too seriously. Anyone else have this? Patient here. Came out of anesthesia and heard got eyes somebody that I used to know playing in the recovery room. I ask myself why they were playing it at like 10x the normal speed and the nurse just goes okay so she's not ready to go home yet lol. Patient here. I was getting my wisdom teeth out, and before I went under I told them that bananas are radioactive. When I woke up, I proceeded to repeat that several times and explain radioactivity. As a 17-year-old I had a colonoscopy because GI doctors couldn't figure out why I couldn't go number 2. I mention this as an important detail, because after the colonoscopy I was still very much under the anesthesia effects, loopy, and when my mom tried to offer saltines I started screaming how many calories do those things have and my mom starts panicking like calm down, lower your voice. People are gonna think you have an eating disorder or something and I just said I can't talk quiet what's going on. The ironic thing was I guess besides dysregulating my ability to control vocal volume, the anesthesia kind of acted like a truth serum in a way. No one found out I had an eating disorder until I almost died from it a year later, but I can't believe that wasn't taken into consideration as to why I couldn't go to the bathroom. Can't poop if you don't eat. I was out to have my wisdom teeth removed and I remember going whoosh, my butt fell out when the drugs started hitting. I was injected with something to loosen me up before they rolled my bed into the operating room. My bed was pretty wide and definitely comfortable. The nurse says to me, okay, we're going to move you over to the skinny table now. The reason she called the operating table the skinny table was because it was narrow compared to my bed. My drugged up brain interpreted it differently though, so I asked, skinny table? Where do you take the fat patients? I had a colonoscopy last month and woke up rested and totally lucid. Bummer. However, when my husband had his vasectomy after our son was born, they gave him a local, it's an outpatient procedure, and some Valium and pain meds after. He was loopy. I stopped at Walgreens to fill his prescription, and he said, as he lolled in the passenger seat with an ice pack on his genitals, hey, will you get me a Coke? I nod. And some Doritos? I nod again and go to leave car. And some Oreos? And some Reese's cups? And some Twizzlers. We were 38, well behind junk food years, not Sonas, and he was 6'2" and 170, not obese or a binge eater. I said, are you serious? And he grinned drunkenly and said, yeah. I grabbed the baby carrier and said, I'm taking the baby with me. He literally did finger guns. This man is a college professor. WHO wears bow ties. I buy his snacks and painkillers and head back outside. And he's telling a guy at the red box video kiosk next to our car that his urologist said he had the best kind of penis for the procedure because his shaft is very straight and uniform. I took him home quickly, gave him his snacks and let him sleep it off. He woke up hours later covered in candy wrappers with orange Dorito fingers and asked, what happened? That was 13 years ago and it's still the best. This guy I was dating, he asked me to take him to get his wisdom teeth removed. He told me that anesthesia doesn't affect him a lot and we were supposed to go on a road trip the next day. So anyway, he gets wheeled out of the dentist by an old nurse. I'm behind the driver's seat and I see him smacking his lips looking up at the sky. She opens my car door and he said, I love her. I love her. He then proceeded to ask me to marry him several times. He tried to pull out his gauze and I told him stop and he said, man, this bitch is bossy. Then he wanted a milkshake. I would suggest a place and he would scream no. Finally we agree on a place and he tells me he'll give me directions. I drive for 15 minutes before I ask him what we're doing and he said he has no idea. We're in the drive-thru and he says, I have something for you. I swear I thought he had bought me a ring the way he had been proposing for last hour. It was his newly extracted teeth. They let me keep them. I want you to have them. He lived on base at the time and was yelling at the gate while they checked his ID for them to hurry UPPP. I finally get him to his room, in bed. He's happily eating his milkshake with a spoon. His mouth was a mess of blood and milkshake. He asked me for a kiss. I gave him a peck. We're married now. I was under anesthesia to get my wisdom teeth removed. When I was slowly waking up, I heard the nurses talking about Hakeem Olajuwon. I started talking about which Rockets I knew. How I knew Rudy teeth, they're all alike. Yeah you do. Okay. My girlfriend is sitting there laughing with them, playing along as if I'm so high and talking. In reality, I was bartender at a place where they would frequent. I knew all those guys. And my girlfriend knew I knew them. She just thought the whole situation was so funny though, that she didn't just say something like, "Oh, he's serious, it's true." Patient here. I got fentanyl in my IV and the last thing I remember was saying, "Wow, this is the good stuff." He laughed and then woke up in post-op. Not an anesthesiologist, but I had my wisdom teeth out last week and accused the very nice nurse of being a liar. She said I wouldn't even remember the doctor coming in, and the first thing I, legibly, said was about how I remembered him coming in and putting a face shield on, and how offended I was that he felt the need to be so protected from my face juices. I also cried upon learning my dog wasn't home. Thought the government was hiding the fact that there was a bucket of spinach outside of my front door. It was leaves, and no, the Canadian government did not secretly put spinach in my house, and waved at multiple terrified bystanders. Oh, and I also told a nurse, while in the elevator, stay away from another doctor in the building because he's not a very nice guy. True. My aunt, who notoriously despises fast food, old Mexican lady whose food is as good as it gets, woke up and looked at my uncle and said, "Are you the sexy man that's gonna take me to McDonald's?" If you knew her, you would know that she would never say that. She has never lived it down. Not an anesthesiologist, but this really rocked me. At the time, I had become really great friends again with my ex. He had been diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma, and the first treatment was aggressive, removing 2/3 of his liver. After he was diagnosed, I was his main man for all visits and care, and very happily so. So, the day comes for his surgery, and it took a very unnerving 4 hours. I had friends there to support me, thankfully. Finally, someone comes to me and says, "We're all done and he's asking to see you," with a smile. Although we weren't technically together then, apparently he had been asking for his boyfriend. As I walk in, I can hear him singing "Stand Back" and alternating that with, "Oh." When I finally got to him, he opened his eyes, see me, and in the most genuine way anyone will ever tell it to me, says, "I love you." I bawled as he fell asleep, then laughed every time he'd wake up, ask what happened, sing "Stand Back," and yell, "Oh." I married that man and knew that I would that day. When coming out of it, I was really angry. My fiancé was trying to steal my ice cream. I didn't have any ice cream, but I was convinced he was trying to steal it. Hey. I woke up from being shocked to reset my heart and started yelling, "Hey." "Hey," the nurse replied. I said, "My chest really hurts." She replied, "That's because we just shocked you." I said, "Oh," and passed TF out again. Geez, all these people with fun stories and all I had was a seizure upon waking up. Patient here. My first C-section was complicated as I was delivering a stillborn and I had complete placenta previa, which gave me a very high chance of hemorrhaging. As the spinal set in and I realized I couldn't feel my legs, my husband, who hadn't been brought in the room yet, but was outside waiting, said he could hear me trying to fight the doctors. Apparently my fight or flight kicked in. So they put me all the way under, for which I am grateful for because I did hemorrhage and almost didn't make it myself. Was a real fun conversation to have in preparation for my next section though. I had a guy, nefarious character, heavy drug use history, who got a bunch of ketamine, probably too much, in recovery from one of the other docs to help with severe pain after his abscess drainage. I was asked to check on him in an hour as the other doc had left for the evening. Went over and saw him in the K-hole drooling on himself but otherwise fine. So I left and came back an hour later. First thing he says to me is, "Why did you do that to me?" I asked him what he meant and he said, "You don't understand. I lived another man's life and there." I apologized and asked him, "How long do you think you were in there?" For reference, it had been something like an hour and a half or 2 hours since his trip began. I don't know, maybe 30 years. I was speechless. I apologized again, made sure he knew he was safe, made sure he wasn't hurting. I made damn sure he knew it wasn't me that did it to him. TLDR. Patient time traveled 30 years in the K-hole. I came out from knee surgery and immediately asked for my kitty cat. The nurse said what? I said, where's my kitty cat? I want my kitty cat now. She assumed I was still dopey until my wife rounded the corner and said I'm his kitty cat. She is. She's a Leo and I've called her that for 19 years. I was giving birth and I told the entire medical staff to go themselves, then turned my head and told the anesthesiologist, not you though, I like you. Not a tech, but I have 2 stories about waking up from anesthesia and saying dumb stuff. First time I told the nurse she was a pretty face to wake up to. Not too bad but still cringeworthy. The second though, I remember telling this woman who had a mostly full sleeve that someone mangled her arm and I hope she didn't pay money for those tattoos. I still lose sleep at night over those. PACU, post-anesthetic care unit, nurse here. I get everyone from OT come my way, so I have a few good ones. 1. A teen around 14 years old wakes up to the world on a mix of ket, fentanyl and propofol. First thing he does it look at me and says, yo, I'm alive. I replied, I sure hope you are, or I'm in the wrong job, mate, to which he then proceeded to dap me up and everyone around him. He then goes on to try and smoke up his blood pressure cuff by rolling it like a joint. 2. A colleague of mine was looking after a 21-year-old male from the military who had some form of renal stenting, to which you get a camera snaked up your old fella if you're a man. Anyway, my colleague in their lack of thinking leaves their phone by the bedside while this man uses a urinal bottle. This man proceeds to take about 10 plus selfies of him starkers with his meat and 2 veg on full view on my colleague's phone. The best part was they didn't find the photos till 2 hours later. 3. A 4-year child comes into the OT to be inducted for a broken arm. The anesthetist decides to use sevoflurane, sleepy gas, to put the kid to sleep. After one breath the kid turns to us and goes, so this is what mommy's special juice is like, to which he then promptly blacks out, with all of us in hysterics, and mum, who was there in OT for induction, red-faced. My personal story. When I had my wisdom teeth out, I kept holding a fake camera up to my face saying you're beautiful and making clicking noises while I was under. I'm a professional photographer and my dental surgeon ended up booking a session with me a year later. Not an anesthesiologist, but a story from my mom about me while I was under. I had a double jaw surgery scheduled for the 21st of April, 2016. The procedure was fine. I remember waking up halfway through it and getting more anesthesia. After the surgery ended, they put me into the hospital room to let the drugs wear off of me. I didn't remember much of this time, so this comes from my mom, but she was sitting in the room with me, watching the news on the TV. I wake up and I'm quiet for a little bit before I start sobbing. My mom thinks it's because my mouth hurts. My mouth is wired shut, so I actively can't correct her with words, and have to try and write out, on paper, what I'm crying about. The news was broadcasting about Prince's death, and I was hysterical over the fact that I apparently killed Prince and that I had to turn myself in. My cousin had a horse fall on her femur, absolutely shattering it. Surgery was needed and they had to put in 3 bolts along with other hardware. She woke up mid-surgery, sat up and said, "What's that?" She said the surgeon nearly jumped out of his skin. She couldn't feel anything, so the surgeon gave her a quick tour of where they were at in the surgery before putting her back under. My dad also asked the DR during a colonoscopy if he could have pictures of the inside of his arsehole to show his friends as a prank. Needless to say, they loved when he has any appointments. My sister one summer when she was 5 got her big toe caught in a bicycle chain while being rode double. It nearly severed it off. It was hanging by a piece of skin. After they got her to the ER and gave her pain meds, she's kept screaming and yelling, "You, I hate you, Shell, you not my friend no more." Shell is the neighbor girl who was riding her double on the bicycle. My mother was mortified that her 5-year-old daughter was cussing and screaming like that. They finally got her calmed down and gave her a coloring book and crayons. She tried to eat the brown crayon BC. She thought it was a candy bar. Then on her way home she started singing Jingle Bells and pointing at the traffic lights saying how pretty the Christmas lights were. Me and my brother still make fun of her. You, Shell, you not my friend no more. Edit. Spelling. I had my wisdom teeth removed at 19 and it was a major surgery with a hospital stay because I had 2 full sets stacked on top of each other. Not sure the medical stuff, but I now have a plate in my face on the right side. Anyways, I was pretty nervous going in and they gave me something strong to relax me before wheeling my away. I apparently said I was too old to be kidnapped. When I woke in the bed afterwards, I accused the nurse of stealing my kidney and I was going to sue before promptly passing out again. Should be noted, my mom has an extremely high tolerance to anesthesia. When she was 3 or 5 she had an open heart surgery. About halfway through she woke up and watched them for a moment and then scared the crap out of her surgeon by asking what something was. 20 years later she walked into his office with little baby me and at first he tried kicking her out saying no. Get out, I do pediatrics not adults, and then saw my little cleft-lipped self and said there's another one of you. A few years later I was having a face or wrist surgery and while they waited to make sure I was fully out, inherited some of my mom's tolerance. I apparently started telling them that different things were stupid like their scrubs, how cold the stethoscope and room were, and my stuffed toy duck agreed with me. I remember absolutely none of this, but the doctors recounted it to my mom and I'm teased for it. When I was about 10 I believe I was coming out of it and touched my thumb to my pinky and was very proud of my accomplishment. At my last major surgery, as I finally woke up, I had the oxygen tubes in my nose because I kept forgetting to breathe. When my doctor told me, I informed him that oxygen is Matt had known me since before I could talk, and just a few months later I was loopy BC needles and my friend, and he had to deal with me laughing for like 10 minutes because his student said the length of the needle doesn't matter, it's the girth, which was the last time I was his patient. On a cute note though, we made plaster molds of my hands before and after the main chunk of my hand surgeries and gave them to him. Made the otherwise stoic man sob, and they were still displayed on his desk the last time I was there. There's a song by Pepper that my brothers and I quote to each other, "What's wrong with you, face?" We will randomly say it to each other. My dad was going in for spinal fusion and during the surgery prep my youngest brother and I kept saying it to each other. "Hey, so I know you stubbed your toe the other day, but what's wrong with your face?" My dad goes in for surgery and all goes well. Surgeon comes out and talks to him during recovery and says, "Normally I don't discuss with patients what they say coming out of anesthesia, but I have to know why you kept asking me what's wrong with my face." Over and over again my dad just burst out laughing and explained. They both had a chuckle. Before I went under they had Beatles music on in the background of the OR. A day in the life to be specific. I worked in the hospital and knew a lot of the OR staff, so I figured they just knew I was a big Beatles fan. Anyway, when I woke up in recovery I told my nurse to thank whoever had put the Beatles on during the surgery. She looked at me very puzzled and said there was no music on at any point before or during the surgery. So I guess I hallucinated the majority of a day in the life while really high on drugs in the OR. Not an anesthesiologist, but this is my little story. When I was being put under for my wisdom teeth, I started to have an anxiety attack. I have general anxiety disorder, and pain in my left arm is usually a sign of anxiety coming on. Don't worry, my heart is healthy, it's just nerve damage. So, my left arm was going numb, and I started to freak out. The doctor decided to give me some laughing gas to calm me down, and when I started giggling and laughing, everyone else calmed down and my surgeon was ready for me to go to sleep. Well, the room spun and suddenly, I went to fight or flight mode and began to struggle to get out. I don't really remember much, but I was screaming and thrashing. Nurses and doctors were called to hold me down. Absolute pandemonium. Mind you, I'm a short skinny 18-year-old, but I'll tell you that anxiety makes you pretty strong when you want to leave. So, as I'm going under, I'm still fighting and screaming, even conscious, and the nurses are escorting my mom out, even though technically I wasn't really under. I woke up when the surgery was done, confused and very quiet. The nurse told me that I looked very sleepy and unsure of where I was, and right as she was going to call my mom, I asked for a woman named Claudia. I don't know any Claudias though, so it was kind of weird. I was a zombie, you could have me do anything, and I would have done it. As we were leaving, my mom overheard one of the surgeons say, I have never seen someone fight the anesthesia like that before, so that's my little claim to fame in the dentist field as someone who almost got himself killed to free himself from anesthesia. Just before we sent the last patient under, he said, "Does anyone want anything while I'm out?" and then promptly fell asleep. Not really. Apparently, when I had surgery to remove my Bartholin's gland, a gland at the entrance of the vagina that can get an abscess, they asked me how I felt as soon as I was awake. I said I felt like I got by an elephant and then I wanted to hug everyone. On my anesthesia rotation in medical school, we had this one guy who kept bragging he would get all the way down to 0 when asked to do the count back from 10 thing. The guy had already received the IV benzo they give in pre-op to keep you chill as they roll you down the hall into the OR. Typical anesthesiologist joke is to call it a diet margarita. They love that joke where I went to school. So anyway, the guy was probably feeling good and loose, so he was being all braggy about making it down to 0. All like, bet. I'll get to 0, you'll see. I'd seen several inductions at that point, and the doc always pushed steadily and deliberately while asking the person to count. This time though, he told the guy to start counting, then whammed the plunger down like he was trying to clear a clog. The dude barely made it to D before his eyes rolled back. I can't tell you what he told me before I fell asleep. With a grin on his face, he said, "This is same drug Michael Jackson had when he died." Then I passed out. I was under anesthesiology for a major surgery. When I first woke up, I don't remember much. But then I remember being wheeled to my hospital room. Then my dad started complaining to me about my brother. Apparently they were having an argument over text. I remember whispering, "Please shut up." One time I, a male biology student in his early 20s with a stuck kidney stone, was being put under for surgery, just as the anesthesiologist was pushing meds and telling me to count back from 100. I looked up at him in a drugged but focused gaze and said, "You're so pretty. You could be in movies in blackness." Anesthesiologist was like a grizzled 70-year-old hunched back looking guy with a lopsided grimace and more ear hair than head hair. Great doc though. Very last thing I remember hearing was the OR nurses cracking up laughing. It was a smallish medical community and I knew some of the people there, so as a joke somebody snuck his headshot into my chart. I like to think it was him gunning for a second career though.